Hi everybody. As I promised, I wanted to make a quick video to show you my workflow to create those rim-lit dark images. I'm going to be using Lightroom and Photoshop to do this, but you can set it up so you can just use Photoshop or just use Lightroom. To me, this is kind of the right mix. It's doing a couple of quick edits in Lightroom that then allow me to really do the finishing touches on Photoshop. So first thing first, we want to find the right image, and basically going through the different images here, I found this one. Now this is quite bright, and you can get a lot of the work done in camera, but you know, anything you can also do in post-processing is just as good. So what I see here in this image that I like is kind of a bunch of nice rimlet horsebacks, nice shapes. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to crop this image. I'm going to give it, you know, you can do it freehand, freestyle. I like for this, I found that the kind of the white standard works well. So I'm going to kind of center it over there. Yep, looks good. And go ahead and crop. So we can see we have some nice flowing shapes here. Now, obviously the background is very bright. The rim lighting is okay, but we want to make it pop. So let's start playing with some of the values here. First, let's bump the exposure down a bit, just so we can you know, emulate doing the exposure compensation on your camera. So I'm gonna take it down maybe 2.5 stops. That looks good. Now what I want to do is I do want to bump up the highlights so they come up really nice and contrasty. I want to take the shadows down. I definitely want to hide or get that dark feeling to it. Next, I would probably change some of the values here. My favorite setting is this. Obviously, you can find whatever works for you. It's just the way that the colors come out is something that I like seeing here. If for some reason you want to play with the temperature, maybe make it a little bit warmer, that's also a possibility. But I'd say that's about it as far as the first color adjustments. Now we have all this very bright space still in the background, and what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to use one of the Lightroom tools, that is the gradient fill. And gradient fill is very useful for several things. You can warm up parts of the picture. You can also give it a special tint if you want to. For our purposes, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be lowering the exposure even further on the top part of the image. So what I'm doing basically is I go up to the top of the screen, press and hold the mouse button, and drag down. I want the middle point to sort of be where the backs are. I'm going to release the button, and now what you can see is I get a full editing screen. So as I mentioned, you can change the temperature, make that part a little bit warmer. You can let's say add noise or remove noise, play with the white values or the dark or the black values. I should note, when you see those blue areas filled, I have it to set up to show me when I'm getting clipping of either the shadows or the highlights. You do that by clicking on the histogram. When you have that highlighted, it'll show you what areas are clipped. That's a useful tip regardless when you're working in Lightroom and you want to see if you're accidentally clipping highlights or the shadows. So basically what I want to do here is I'm going to reset this. All I want to do is I want to lower the exposure. So you can see I'm getting some clipping. Now I can adjust this a little bit further. Okay, I got some reduction, right? I'm gonna select done, but I can do this again. So again, I'm gonna pick up the gradient filter, go to the top of the image, take it down, just about the same location, and again I'm going to reduce the exposure. And basically what the blue is showing me is that I'm losing all that detail, which is exactly what I wanted to do, right? I want the top to be black, and I actually want the bottom to be black as well, but that I'll do in a different way. Or you know what, we're here, let's do that as well. So again, done with this one, select it again, and again go from the bottom up. Here doesn't really matter how far I go. I'm going to select the exposure, take it all the way down. And the nice thing, you know, I do down, excuse me, I go and show you that I press done to complete the change. But another neat trick is you can just go and draw another filter, and it'll maintain the same values as the previous one, so you don't have to constantly go and reset the exposure to go down. Okay, now I'm done. Now let's look at the image without the clipping, and you see most of it is pretty much ready. Now this looks a little bit darker than I want, so I'm going to bump up the exposure just a tad, and it looks good. So now maybe add a little bit saturation, get the colors to really pop. Okay, good. So now we're ready to go on to Photoshop and really kind of finish cleaning up this image. So the shortcut is Command E, or what I think is Control E over in PC land, or you go to Photo and you do Edit in and Edit in Photoshop. I guess this is the I should mention that the Lightroom I'm using is the Lightroom Classic. The Photoshop is whatever the current creative version is. So I'm going to go to Photo, Edit in, and Photoshop CC 2019. Now we wait for the image to load. What we're going to do here is really just clean up the image, make sure that it looks the way we want it to look. You know, you can see that there's still noise in the background that we want to get rid of, but overall the image looks pretty good. So let me just do this. Now I mentioned that my preference, and quite a few photographers now like to use layers and what is known as non-destructive editing. What that is, again, you may want to undo some of the changes that you've made, and obviously you have, you know, the ability to just step back or do a history brush. It's so much easier to do it through layers. Layers just give you the kind of nice ability to separate the changes from the original image. So we leave the background as it is and we create a new layer. There's a an icon here to create a new one, or you can go to layer and create a new layer, and there's all kinds of options. I'm just going to make it a simple one. I'm just going to make it an empty layer. So you get what is here shows as layer 1. Double clicking it, you can rename it to, let's say I'm going to do some fixes to the backs, just because there's some spots where it's a little bit too dark and you kind of miss continuity. So I'm just going to do fixes. Now, when you want to do that, make sure I'm going to be doing the healing brush. But what I want to do is make sure that the sample all layers is checked. I'm on the fixes layer, it's the active one. I'm going to zoom in. I'm using Command plus or Control plus, and let's say I want to just here make it look like it's more of a continuous. Let's switch to the stamp tool. Might be a little bit easier to do that. I'm gonna be sampling this area and fixing it. But this is just, some basic things. So just to show you what happens in the background in Photoshop background is if I hide the background layer and just look at the fixes layer, you'll see that only this is created, only the fix. So now if we decide, what, we don't like this fix, I can choose my eraser tool. I'm pressing E as a shortcut, and I'm just gonna erase the original, or erase the fix. And again, if you look at the fixes layer, it's empty now, but we have not actually changed anything in the background. This is good just because you always have your original photo still preserved. So I'm gonna do put the fix back in just because I did like it. So so fix layer is on, stamp, and right here. Okay, so enough of that. Now what I want to do is I want to start and really get rid of all of those areas that are still showing some of the background. Now I showed it a little bit differently when we did it back at the workshop. I'm gonna actually create an adjustment layer that's brightness and contrast, and really bring up the brightness all the way up. And what this does, it helps me visualize or see things that maybe because of monitor calibration or different color spaces you won't see. It's detail that is in there, but we didn't see it when we were working on it. So again, this is just a layer. I did not change the brightness of the actual image. If I hide it and I hide the fixes, we can see our original images back there. So now, again, I want to create a separate, just to really emphasize the layers aspect, I want to create a new layer that will be, I'm going to call it hide background. Sorry, typing and talking at the same time is not one of my fortes. So now what I'm going to do is a bunch of sampling and and stamping. So I will hide this properties because I don't need it. And what I'm going to do is make my stamp a little bit bigger because I know from before that this area is completely black. So I'm going to start using it as that. So I'll stamp and start just really going over. You don't need to be perfect initially, just do the big blocks. And as we get closer to the backs, we're going to go zoom in and do it a little bit, you know, more refined process so it doesn't really take away from the backs. Keep in mind that you may need to resample every now and then just so you know, don't miss out on areas that were just not included. So what I mean by that, if you do a sample out of here, what may happen is you'll get clipping. You see how the stamp doesn't go all the way up. So again, I just resample the area, and I just want to get rid of the big blocks. Okay, now I'm gonna take my stamp and make it much smaller. I'm going to zoom in and do pretty much the same thing. I'm going to now be a little bit more careful about taking out the background. A quick note, it's slow on my computer right now because I am using Camtasia to record this video, so it's doing quite a bit in the background. So usually this is faster, so don't get nervous about the speed here. The way I'm doing this, by the way, another useful power tip for Photoshop and actually Lightroom is to really not have to constantly navigate through the image. Once I'm done with a section, I press the space bar, the icon turns into a hand, and then basically by pressing the mouse button I can drag the image. Leaving the spacebar will return me to the last tool that I was using. So very useful as you kind of go and do these long traversals through your image. So I'm going to just go through this. And I like that when you look at this image, you don't just get the back, you also get a little bit more of the horse's fur as it goes down their body. It creates more interest, more texture, so that's definitely a nice thing to have. And we're getting close to the end of this. Almost done here. This is a little bit more complicated because I do want to have that little strand of hair stand up, so I'm gonna kind of come in, make the stamp smaller. I don't need to really resample right now because I'm really in a good region. So overall I think we have it. So going out looks pretty good, and that was just one pass. This we probably want to get rid of just again because it just looks odd and out of place. It was just a random beam of light, I guess. But all in all, I think we've got the image that we were going for. So now the last thing we need to do is make a decision, right? We have the brightness filter, and by the way, let me show you again the power of the various layers. So I'm going to turn off the backdrop. I'm going to turn off the fixes. I'm going to turn off the highlights, and you can see this can look really messy, and if you really want to be, because it looks like I missed a couple of areas here, you can quickly do a stamp tool and just fill in the the areas that were not filled. That way, in case I just didn't see something and it's still lurking back there, and the ultra fancy monitors, you might see something. I'm just basically going in between those little cracks and just filling it up. If you really want to go crazy, go ahead and fill the whole thing up. Don't know that it's necessarily needed. It takes about 2 seconds to do, so it's not that it's a major operation. So again, stamp, get a nice size brush. Okay, as you see, because I had some smaller areas, I do need to resample or start at a new spot just so I can completely fill. Okay, now this is our hide background. I'm going to bring back the fixes and bring back the background, and this is our image. Now, last thing is we might want to we want to think about this brightness contrast. I bumped it up all the way, which means it'll actually show up very, very bright on screens that are set up in a certain way. You may want to just take it off and see it like this. On my screen right now, it looks possibly a little bit too dark. So I'm actually going to leave the brightness in here, but now I'm going to just knock it down a little bit. So it, it's not as bright as this, but it's not completely dark. So this looks about right for me. And we're done. So I'm going to do, I'm going to save this, and I'm going to quit, go back to Lightroom, and this is our image. I hope this was useful. Definitely appreciate any comments, and if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot them my way. You have my email, aavivi@mac.com. Talk to you all later. Bye.